We begin this hour with growing signs that some Republicans are starting to break ranks with President Trump. First, there is the pushback over his so-called anti-weaponization fund. On his podcast Friday, Republican Senator Ted Cruz described a tense two-hour Senate caucus meeting about the fund with Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. Take a listen.
I got to tell you, the Republican senators were pissed. People were, the entire meeting, they were screaming at the acting attorney general, and he was trying to lay out the legal basis. There were multiple senators yelling at the attorney general, saying this feels like self-dealing. This feels like Trump cut a deal with himself.
Now, the tipping point seems to have been when Trump endorsed Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton for senator instead of the four-time incumbent John Cornyn. As the Wall Street Journal lays out, Republican senators saw it as a reckless way to treat a senior Republican incumbent whose seat the party can't afford to lose in November. Joining us now, Nikki McCann Ramirez, political news reporter for Rolling Stone, and Philip Bump, Hearst, Connecticut senior data editor and columnist. It's great to have both of you with us. What does it say to you, Phil, if at all, whether or not we're going to see a split within Republicans? I feel like we sound like broken records. Maybe it's wishful thinking on our part that we want to see some split within some parts of the Republican Party with Donald Trump. It's usually Republicans that are outgoing, like Tom Tillis and previously Jeff Flake and others. But the president still commands an unbelievable amount of power over the party, as we saw in Louisiana, as we saw in Indiana, and potentially what we might see in Texas.
Yeah, he does. But the problem for a lot of Republicans is they can't rely on Republicans to win elections. They have to get independents. In some places, they may need to pull over some Democrats. And we have reached a point where there are multiple things that are affecting Donald Trump that aren't even related to Donald Trump making bad decisions. It is the midterm election cycle. They need to win their elections. A lot of them are past their primaries, so they don't need to only appeal to the Republican base. Donald Trump is going to be a lame duck president. He already is a lame duck president, but he's going to be much more of a lame duck president after midterms are over. The number that jumps out to me that I think is the most important is that Wall Street Journal finding that strong approval among Republicans went from 75% in January to 57% in May. That's a big drop in strong approval. It doesn't mean they don't approve of Trump. It just means they're not excited. They're not enthusiastic. And if you are a Republican who's on the ballot in November, that scares you because those people are going to be like, I'm not going to go out and vote. I'm sick of all this. I don't like how things are going. And those people are going to be the ones not getting the votes, not Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, we just played some of my reporting from Social Circle, Georgia. And while I was there, a lot of people were angry with Congressman Mike Collins, who's trying to become Senator Mike Collins and take on Jon Ossoff. And I found the exact same phenomenon there, that they are basically able to channel the anger that maybe they should be directing at the president at other Republicans, whether that is a congressman who they think hasn't done enough for them, or that is Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche here.
Yeah, 100%. I think what you're seeing this week is really the realization that Trump's priorities for the party are significantly diverging from the priorities of the actual people that need to get reelected this election cycle. You have, in the endorsement of Ken Paxton, the president choosing to put his thumb on the scale of a consequential election, and not necessarily toward the candidate who actually polls better, but toward the candidate who he likes more. Who
is more loyal to him.
Is more loyal, who promised him a ballroom and a vote on the SAVE Act. And the reality of it is we're seeing polling coming out of Texas that shows that both Paxton and Cornyn are about 30 points behind Tallarico among Hispanics. Chris Perkins, a very respected GOP pollster out of Texas, wrote a whole memo that was the talk of the town in Texas this month because he is warning that enthusiasm amongst loyal Republican voters in Texas is down. So Phil is completely correct. What you're seeing here is these Republican lawmakers who are getting either primaried out or they're now lame ducks themselves with nothing to lose, or who are seeing the numbers and saying, OK, if I throw it in with this man, with our president, I might not make it through November.
Can I ask you, to what extent do you think Senate Republicans are motivated when it comes to the debate over Paxton and Cornyn by like their, intellectual disagreements or areas of overlap with these different men? Or to what extent is some of it just that none of them want to hang out with Ken Paxton? No, I mean, like,
why not both? Why not
famously, both? Republicans don't love the guy.
No,
for personal reasons.
Well, I mean, they also don't like Ted Cruz, and you don't see them turning on Ted Cruz.
But
sometimes they do, quietly.
That's the thought. Imagine if the two senators from Texas are Ken Paxton and Ted Cruz. I think the other problem here is that Cornyn, for for all the hay that Trump and Republicans, Paxton supporters, are trying to make about him not being loyal enough, I think the numbers that he votes for the Republicans 98% of the time, he is one of the most committed conservatives. He just doesn't have a podcast. He's not constantly suing people. He's not on TV all the time. And the reality is that if you think about how long he's been in office and what the electorate looks like in Texas, if you voted in more than one Texas election, there is a high chance you voted for John Cornyn at some point. So I think what these Republicans are saying, senators like John Thune, leader John Thune, who is a McConnellite, people kind of forget that he was brought in to be kind of a bridge between the McConnell faction and the more like hardline insane senators that we get. Those kinds of people are wondering, okay, am I safe? Does it really matter if I vote 98% of the time with Republicans and the president? If I cross him, is that the end of my career?
Well, or Paxton also got impeached by Republicans, by the way, and so maybe there's a little bit of a bond there. Philip, one thing I'm curious about is, some of the subtext here is about, like, it used to be that loyalty to Trump correlated with electability for these red state lawmakers. And now it feels like there's a little bit of tension between those things. Like, if you're loyal to Trump, it actually might hurt you in an election, particularly when Donald Trump's approval ratings are in the toilet at this point. Is it possible that we would at some point reach a stage where loyalty to Trump would hurt Republicans in the election? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's really important to separate primaries from general elections.
Yes,
it has never been the case that Donald Trump is good at getting people across the finish line in general elections. In fact, after 2018, when the Republicans got blown out, there's research that was done that said Donald Trump showing up and endorsing someone, basically what that did is it got a lot of Democrats in that district to be like, oh, Trump likes this guy. Okay. He actually may have cost them 15 seats in 2018 that they would have won otherwise if he hadn't endorsed. He's always been bad at that. He's very good at getting people through primaries, as we saw with Massey in Kentucky this week. He is not good at getting people over the finish line in November. And that's what all these Republicans are going to start turning to. There's still some primaries that need to be settled, but all these Republicans are going to start looking at that. They're going to be looking at the fact he only has 2 years left in office. They're going to be looking at the fact that all he wants to talk about is the ballroom and how tomorrow the war in Iran is going to be settled for the past 3 months, right? Like, they're going to start being like, okay, I need to make decisions here. And I think one of the things that's very tough for them, we saw Trump last week up in my district with Mike Lawler, who's a Republican in a bluish-purple district. And Lawler felt like he had to embrace him because that's the only way to get Republicans to turn out. And it's just like, it's insane. It is political malpractice by whoever's advising Lawler, because Trump is not going to win races for those people, particularly as unpopular as he is.
Well, okay, so let me ask it a different way. Sure. Do we reach a point where Republicans are deliberately distancing themselves from Trump?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think we reach a point not where they're saying Donald Trump is wrong and bad. They're saying, oh, I'm getting a call from the White House. Let's let that go to voicemail.
I'm good. I don't need the campaign.
That's correct. No, I'm sorry. I missed you, Mr. President. Yeah, exactly.
So it looks like he might be turning his sights on Colorado Representative Lauren Boebert. You got Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, Ohio Representative Warren Davidson, Pennsylvania Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, and, of course, as we just said, I guess John Cornyn. He may not have his sights on him, but if he's endorsing his opponent, then he certainly doesn't want him to win. What, if anything, does it say about that wing of the Republican Party? I mean, Lauren Boebert, she's as loyal as you can possibly get to Donald Trump. She broke on I guess, the Epstein files, which was also what Thomas Massey did. And it seems at some point you have to wonder whether or not people connect the dots that Donald Trump does not want anyone who brought to the floor or supported the release of the Epstein files. And I'm wondering why the Democrats are not kind of hammering that point home even more. Or you think they are, and I don't know. What do you think?
If your enemy wants to drop a boulder on their own foot, why would you stop them in the foot race for the House? If Trump, as Philip very wisely said, wants to push through all these hyper-MAGA loyalist candidates through the primaries, that gives Democrats punching bags in the general. It gives independents and moderates someone they can point to and say, like, hey, gas is $5 a gallon, and this guy wants to keep the House Republican. This guy wants to keep enabling Trump's wars of choice, the tariffs, his misconduct. So I think Democrats for now probably are going to be inclined to sort of let this slide. There are, of course, Brian Fitzpatrick. I've heard a lot of Democrats, a lot of moderates talk very highly of him, that he is someone who is supposed to be he's in a very purple district, a district where he could very easily lose his seat. And the reason Trump is trying to target it, he already won his primary, by the way, so he's okay as of now. But the reason Trump was trying to target him is because he suggested floating legislation to block this like $2 billion slush fund for January 6 defendants because he knows that plays well in his district. But to Trump, who can only think in the short term and hasn't realized that he's set up a series of long-term crises for himself that are going to come home to roost in November, he just sees someone who went against him who needs to be expelled from the party.
I also think that Trump is misunderstanding that by 2028, the dynamics are going to be very different. Someone else is going to be the party's nominee for president. They're going to be driving the train. Yes, everyone will have to say, Donald Trump, we love you, you're great. I don't know if he has the juice, is going to have the juice in 2028 that he has even still today.
Do you think like 5, 10 years from now, some of these same people will be like pretending they never knew Trump?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think there are going to be a lot of elected officials who talk about this in a way that doesn't accurately reflect their current position. That's the diplomatic.
There's going to be a lot of passive voice.
Well, yeah, like the one with Iran. We all agree it was bad, but it's hard to say who said it was good.
Yeah. Nikki McCann Ramirez and Philip Bump, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Really appreciate it.
Great to see you in person.